This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media accounts, my columns at 6035 Media, all the other podcasts we've done, 340 something or other number of podcasts we've done, also my photography website, and you can also send me an email if you have suggestions, comments, tips, anything you want, something you want to hear or a guest you want to see on this podcast, let me know. And you can also subscribe to my free newsletter, which goes out about once a week. All of that can be done at hikingbob.com. Today, we're going to get a piece of history that I think everybody in the Pikes Peak region or everybody's ever visited the Pikes Peak region will find interesting. And my guest today is Dean Waits, who is the membership chairman of the Pikes Peak Group of the Colorado Mountain Club. Dean, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure being with you this morning.
Thank you, sir. I guess we start off real quickly. Tell us a little bit about the Colorado Mountain Club and the Pikes Peak Group. We have had Colorado Mountain Club on the podcast before, but tell us about the Pikes Peak Group.
Oh, for sure. I'd be glad to. This whole thing was very interesting to me to do the research. And one thing that I've really enjoyed about this area, I've been here since 2012, and the Colorado Mountain Club, it's one of the older clubs. It was formed in 1912, and so we celebrated our 100th anniversary a few years ago. And the Pikes Peak Group is exclusive to Colorado Springs. We got about 450 members. And one thing that I really like about our club, for me, moving down from Canada, I stayed up there about 3 years. Moving down here, I still needed a little touch up on how to get up and hike in the snow in the mountains and all that. And that's one thing that the Pikes Peak Group, as well as the Mountain Club, has a great bunch of classes that you can join and get into learning new skills, climbing, rock, ice, hiking up all the 14ers year round, whatever you want to do. And so it's been really good for me to get into learning, picking up those new skills and things like that. Well,
I'm glad that you're there. I'm a member of the Pikes Peak Group myself, although I have yet to make it to a meeting or a class. I'm just, Dean, I don't have to tell you how busy I am sometimes. So, but I'm happy to be a member and support the group because you guys do a lot of really great work and stuff like that. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
We're going to get you into something here before long. You never know.
You might have to just drag me out of the house and get me to do that, or drag me away from a trip to get that to happen. But hopefully we can make that happen.
Yeah.
Today, and what I was really interested in, I saw a couple of months ago that you were putting together a program about the history of Barr Trail and Barr Camp, which is, for people who may not be familiar, is the most popular hiking route to the summit of Pikes Peak. And I get a lot of emails from people about, I want to go hike Pikes Peak today, and I'm just flying into town, and I spend a lot of time telling them how bad of an idea that is sometimes. And I don't think people, it's popular because it's so close to Colorado Springs, but it's also, 12 miles one way, 12 and a half miles one way, and it's very difficult. And sometimes you have to remind people this may not be the thing you want to do. But you're going to tell us a little bit about the history of Fred Barr, who it's named after, and the trail and Barr Camp and stuff like that. So I think maybe I'll just let you take off with it and just run with it.
Great. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm getting ready. I'm trying to get out and get into shape myself. I'm co-leading a trip up to Barr Camp. We go up there and we spend the weekend. And if the weather's good and everybody's fired up and ready, well, we'll make a summit attempt. And this is about the 8th year that we've been doing that. So I'm looking forward to that. But when you look back at Fred, he's quite an outgoing person. Did a lot for the area, as well as built the camp, built Barr Trail and all that. But Fred came in to Colorado when he was 11 years old. He was born in Arkansas, in 1882. And this would be an interesting family dynamics. Fred was the oldest of 6 kids. He had 5 younger sisters. So I don't know how all that worked out for him, but his maternal grandfather was a guy named Joel Wade. And Joel lived over at the base of Cheyenne Mountain. And his home was a stagecoach depot for a Cripple Creek stage. So Fred used to jump on the stage, hitchhike rides into the mountains. So that probably helped pique his interest in getting into the mountains and all the different things he did. And when Fred was 18, he got into the livery business with his dad. And so they had burros, and they also had some carriage rides. And back in that time, you know, it was interesting to look at the prices for the things that they charged, because you could get a ride up to Garden of the Gods, Glen Eyrie, Cave of the Winds for 25 or 50 cents. And he even had a 6-hour ride. You could get up on a high drive and charge $1.50 for that. So that was a big price trip. But in 1908, he opened his burro livery up at the top of the incline where the funicular would come up. And that was the very same year that the funicular was built. And its primary purpose then was to take people up to the top of the incline so they could check on water tanks and stuff like that. But it didn't take very long for them to figure out, well, let's open this thing up to some people and let's take some tourists up there. So Fred was right on top of that. He figured that was a good idea. And so he did that. And when you'd go up on the incline or up on the funicular, he had some little rides up there and trails and things like that he built. So he'd take you around there. And then in course, December 31st, 1922, that's the year that Fred and Ed Morath talked him and 2 other guys into hiking up to the top of Pikes Peak, setting off some fireworks. So that was the beginning of the Ataman Club. And he didn't get married until he was 46 years old. And that was in 1928. He married a local lady, Anna Williams, and they never had any kids. But one thing that was really sad for Fred, because you'd think that he was in perfect condition doing all this hiking and everything, in 1940, Fred died of a heart attack. He went down to visit his wife's sister down in New Mexico. But Anna, so Fred was 58 years old when he passed away. But Anna, his wife, she lived another 25 years. So she did well. But so then I'll get on into Barr Trail when Fred started working on that. Now, Fred probably he picked up some of the Fremont Trail that was built back in 1871. Some engineers from the Denver Rio Grande Western Railroad, which was General Palmer's railroad, they started doing the trail up to Pikes Peak. And to give you a little idea of where they started the trail, if you're familiar with where the base of the incline is, I've been looking at a 1913 map that Manly Owens did. And the trail started on the east side, about the base of where the current incline is. And it goes up, it looks like it goes up maybe halfway or so on the incline route. And it goes across the incline to the west and goes on up by Rocky Mount and then goes on up through Cabin Creek and so forth. And Manly didn't think that the trail at that time went on up to the top of Pikes Peak. It was find your own trail. Just go on up how the best you could do. And so Fred started surveying his trail in 1914. And of course, that trail started right at the top of the incline where his livery was. And he completed the survey in 1918. And it was funny because this was on Christmas Eve. And he'd set up his last cairn up near the top of Pikes Peak. And so there he is at nighttime. It's cold. He breaks into the visitors or the building there at that time, spends the night. And, stuff like that this day and time, they'd have 3 police cars up there at the top of the peak to arrest you and bring you back.
We're not advocating breaking into anything.
That's right. Yeah. But so anyway, he started the survey in 1914, finished it in 1918, but the trail was not complete until 1921. So that was from the top of the incline up to Pikes Peak. And in 1917, the segment from Manitou Springs up to No Name Creek, there were 10 guys that were hired by the Forest Service. And Fred was also hired to supervise those guys. So they built that section of the trail in 1917. And they paid Fred $200 for his input and supervision and everything like that. And in 1948, the Forest Service, after World War II, they had access to some smaller bulldozers and little equipment that were excellent to build the trail. And so they did that in 1948, and that's probably the trail that we hike up on today that was built and completed there. And, the trail, like you said, it's such an important thing. So many hikers, like you said, they do try to come up here. They get off the plane from Alabama and they decide, well, I want to go hike Pikes Peak, which you say that is a bad idea. But there's so many different things that are so important on this trail. And this was an interesting little thing I learned. They have all kind of runs. They have the marathon, they have the ascent, have the Pikes Peak Challenge. And so in 1956, there was a Florida-based doctor that was here, and he did not like smokers, or he didn't like the idea. He wanted to promote the idea that smoking was bad for you. So he went around and he recruited non-smokers and smokers to compete in the 1956 marathon. And he ended up getting 11 non-smokers and 3 smokers. And I've got photos of them lining up, and some of them are wearing overalls and, all kind of things. Definitely not like we dress today to run that race. And it was interesting because one of the smokers finished first, but he dropped out after that. So there were actually 4 that finished, that went to the top, came back down. They were all non-smokers. But this is another thing that seems to happen here in Colorado Springs. In 1959, there was a lady named Arlene Piper, and she wanted to run the marathon. She brought her 9-year-old daughter, Karen, and they ran the marathon. So when they got up to the top, Arlene said, well, I want to go back to finish this thing. Karen stayed at the top, but Arlene came back down, and her time was 11 hours and 9 minutes. But the significant thing of this, by doing this, this was the first sanctioned marathon that was completed by a lady ever in the U.S.
Wow.
And it was like 10 years later when a lady finished the Boston Marathon. So this was kind of another one of those footnotes here in Colorado. But, I've hiked the Barr Trail, and you've probably done it numerous times too. And it's interesting to hike it, in the winter. I was up there hiking. So we spent the night at Barr Camp here a few weeks ago. and it got down to 0. The clouds moved in. Hoarfrost just covered everything, even my hiking poles. And so it's, to me, it's kind of like a box of chocolates, to borrow a term from Forrest Gump, because you never know what you're going to get. It can be a very interesting and challenging trip. And
I've
I
been
like
at
to
Barr Camp.
volunteer.
I've been at
Yeah.
Barr Camp in August and got snowed on.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's where I'm going to have to take you up there. We're going to have to go up there and you'll spend the weekend with us one of these winters. It's always great.
Okay.
But I know the Pikes Peak Group, we do trail work. We do trail volunteer. I think you do some volunteer work too.
Yeah.
Trails.
Yeah. Cheyenne Mountain State
And
Park mostly.
I like to work with Friends of the Peak. They're always there on the side of Pikes Peak or on the other side or wherever. And I also like to work with Rimfee. And they've been involved in rebuilding the Crags Trail from the west side of Pikes Peak. I think they've been working over about 3 years, and they've done an excellent job. So if there's anyone that's listening to this that wants to get out and kind of help these trails, because they're loved to death, they really are. They get a lot of traffic. You can volunteer with Friends of the Peak, or you can volunteer with Rimfee. They do a lot of work, a lot of very good work all around the area. But so we've mentioned Barr Camp. Next year is going to be the 100th birthday of Barr Camp. When Fred started his little trip in he started when he got up there to the top, 1908, and they came up with a super little deal. You could ride the funicular that went up the incline, and you could take a 10-hour round trip burro ride up to the top of Pikes Peak for $3. How can you pass up a deal like that, And so eventually in 1922, Fred put up some tents. So at that time, when he would take the people up, they would start in the afternoon the day before, as just a 2-hour journey from the top of the incline up to Barr Camp. They'd spend the night, of course, sit around a campfire and tell a lot of stories, I'm sure. And so early in the morning, Fred would rouse everybody, saddle up the burros, and go up to the top of Pikes Peak for the sunrise. And then they'd return later on that day. But he started his tents in 22, built the cabins in 1924, and the burro rides, even after his death, the burro rides continued. Other people bought up the rights to do that, and they continued in 1960. So, and the thing about Barr Camp, after Fred and everybody else passed away, it was vacant for a few years. The Mennonites took it over in 1963 and ran it to about 1976, but they only did it during the summer months. So as I know I might have been back in the day, in my early days, I might have liked to go up to Barr Camp and create a little trouble or whatever. So it while it was vacant, it had a lot of vandalism, fell into disrepair and all that. And the Forest Service, they wanted to demolish it. So it went through a period of kind of sad news. Is it going to stay or is it going to go or whatever? But along comes a guy named Monty Barrett. And he and a guy named Harold Barnes created Adventures Limited. And they went to the Forest Service and they came up with a plan. They bought the lease to continue there at Barr Camp. So Monty's kind of the hero to save Barr Camp. And it was interesting reading different newspaper articles of people very concerned with the fact that is Barr Camp going to disappear? Is somebody going to come in and save it or whatever? So they did. But you've been up there recently. You have the pancakes in the morning and the spaghetti at night, and all the different goings on there, the people you meet and everything. Back in the day, Monty served stew, and you could stay overnight for $2.
Oh, wow.
Another one of those great deals, you know.
Is the building that's up there now the original building?
It is.
Okay.
It is. And in 1971, when they were kind of redoing the incline, the Barr Camp group hired those people. They flew in material with a helicopter. And now if you go up there, you'll see the new porch. And I think they replaced some logs in the structure. And of course, rebuilt the bridges that go on over to Mountain View. So they did a lot of good work up there. And, now they got composting toilets. And when I was up there the last few weeks, I noticed that there was a solar panel up there.
Oh, wow.
For use there at the camp to get a little electricity. And it's amazing in reading the numbers of people that they get there at Barr Camp. They have about 18,000 folks per year that come by, either hiking the trail or come up there, turn around or whatever. And they have about 2,400 guests per year.
Wow.
So it's really an active place. And another key function that they do, the caretakers there at Barr Camp, they're a very critical part of the search and rescue, because they're always having people come up there and get lost or whatever. So they're kind of one of the places that keep things going for that. But
you had mentioned that was there more than one cabin up there at a time? Right now there's the one building, and then there's like these little shelters, kind of like that you can reserve to spend the night. Were there more actual cabins up there at one point, and now the one is just left, or were they always just these little shelters?
Now they have two cabins. They have a major cabin, another larger cabin in the back.
That's right.
And that's open in the summer.
That's right.
And when the Ataman go up there, they stay in the back cabin as well as the main cabin there. And the lean-tos, that's where I'll always like to stay, there in the lean-tos. Right. But yes, there was another shelter built up there as a barn for the burros. And I think it burnt down sometime shortly after, they got maybe in the mid-30s or somewhere in there. Okay. I think it might have burnt down. But it's quite a place. Yeah. And it's always interesting to go up there, because I've ran into people that, from a lot of different places in the world, Europe, Spain, wherever. And so I always enjoy going up there. But I usually get in there and I get to talking and stay there probably longer than I should. And I ended up hiking back down to the bottom. And I get there and I need my headlamp,
I like doing that hike from, not to get off topic of Barr Trail, but I like getting dropped off at Elk Park, right about tree line on the highway, and then hiking the Elk Park Trail around the front of Pikes Peak, the east face of Pikes Peak, to Barr Camp, right, and then coming down Barr Trail and coming back out at the base of it, by the base of the incline. I love doing that little hike. And when they opened the Lake Moraine Trail, I did that route, but I started at Elk Park, through Barr Camp, through the Lake Moraine Trail, then down Captain Jack's, and then back down High Drive. That was like 20 some odd miles. I don't necessarily recommend that in one day.
That's a jump.
It was all downhill, which you think is easy, but my hips hurt pretty good for about 4 days after that one.
Exactly.
But Barr Camp is it's a great, it's positioned well, about halfway up, I guess, just about halfway up, and the people in there are great, and they have T-shirts there that say you were at Barr Camp, and that's the only place you can get them. So if you want one, you got to go up there and get it. And it's and the people there, and I know they've been changing the caretakers there a little more frequently than they did in the past. I'm sure you'll talk about who takes care of that. But the people there are always wonderful to chat with, even if you're just dropping through and just taking a break or something like that. They're always wonderful to chat with.
Exactly. Yeah. Carl and Robert are up there now, and I think they've been there, I don't know, maybe 8 months, 9 months, or something like that. But yeah, they're quite a nice couple. And that trail you're talking about, hiking from the first place over to Elk No, or bring me back to speed.
The Elk Park Trail.
Elk Park Trail.
Yeah.
Have you stopped off and gone over to the tunnel?
Yes.
Where that big piece of equipment and all that stuff is?
Many times. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be interesting to be able to hike back into that tunnel, but I know they've got it closed off. They've had it closed off for a number of years. Probably a good reason they do have that thing closed off, because I'm sure a lot of people would be in there spending the night, or trying to, or maybe continue to look for gold. I don't know.
Keep digging their way through it.
Yeah. But so anybody that's listening, I would for sure recommend hike up to Barr Camp. If you just go up there and get a Gatorade, they do have some snacks and things like that, or go up there and spend the night, because that's a neat place to go up there and stay. No other place that you can go, and you got some folks that are going to fix you some pancakes in the morning. And if you stay up there late at night, get up there late at night, they're going to fix you some spaghetti. And it's worth the trip.
I usually recommend when people contact me, because they'll see my column or see the podcast, and they contact me and they want to do that hike, and they may not have much experience, climbing a 14er, especially when it's 26 miles round trip. My usual suggestion to them is to reserve a spot to stay overnight at Barr Camp and do it in stages. Go up to Barr Camp, spend the day, get rested, and then the next morning get a bright and early start to go up to the summit, especially in the summer when you have to worry about, thunderstorms in the late afternoon or something like that. And then, consider even spending a second night at Barr Camp on the way back down.
For sure. That's exactly what we do when we hike up with the club. We leave on a Friday, hike up to Barr Camp, spend the night, and check the weather reports and all that kind of stuff. And some of us, myself might be included, because I haven't climbed any 14ers in a while. I will hike up to the A-frame and have lunch. And the people that are going to go on up to the top of Pikes Peak, they'll leave before breakfast. So it's a long day doing a 12-mile round trip. And, you gain about 3,000 foot elevation from Barr Camp. So it's a trip, and especially in the winter, because you don't know, what the snow conditions are going to be. And usually the trails disappeared. So you either go up a couloir or something else. And it's interesting trip, but that is a great way, the way you suggested, to do it. Just go up there in stages and don't knock yourself out, And
this also gives people a chance to evaluate their progress, and maybe they'll decide, maybe I'll just go back down after this tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
You don't want anybody to get hurt going up there, especially if they're not experienced in high altitude hiking or anything like that.
That's for sure. That's for sure. The elevation will make you a believer or a non-believer real quick, and you don't even know what's happening. You don't know why you can't get that deep breath.
Yep.
But I think you were aware last year the club did work on the A-frame.
Yeah. So tell people what the A-frame is.
The A-frame is a little bitty, kind of a 3-sided building, and it's built at about 11,500 feet. And I think the primary purpose of it being built was a safety shelter for people that are going on up top of Pikes Peak, and the weather can change within 15 minutes. You can go from blue sky to a storm really quick. So it's a nice little place to duck in. And the Forest Service came up with the idea in 1964. And it's kind of fashioned after the cabins that were built up in the Adirondacks and along the Appalachian Trail. So for a while, it was called the Adirondack Shelter. And like I said, built in 64. And this was the interesting thing about my research for this deal. It's easy to find things that were done back in the 1800s, 1871. Like I say, the trail was built up Pikes Peak and all this other kind of stuff. But for the A-frame, it was a real interesting little box of goodies that I ended up getting from one of the prior Pikes Peak Group chairmen that had all the information that I needed, all about when the Pikes Peak Group got involved. There were various groups that helped maintain it, because right there at Tree Line, it catches tremendous storms. Wind, snow is stacked up all around it and everything. But it's kind of the worst thing. I think the detrimental thing to the A-frame is going to be mankind. Because let me go through the little thing here, the years that things happened and stuff like that. But the Pikes Peak Group, the first work I found, they did it in 1984. And they rebuilt the foundation, and they kind of repaired the walls, and they put another roof on it. But the interesting thing that they did was they put a wood burning heater inside the A-frame. And so I find that kind of funny. But in 1991, I think they kind of had a early leave no trace idea, because trees were being cut down up there for wood, and they would dump the ashes out in front of the A-frame and so forth and things like that. So they kind of thought that, well, maybe we don't need this heater in there anymore.
That was going to be my question. Where were they getting the fuel without cutting down trees that were right around there?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Because, there's not going to be a handy little stack out there.
Right.
Like you go up to some 7-Eleven or something like that and buy a little stack of wood for $3. So, yeah, it was not a good idea. And so in that same year, 1991, the Forest Service gave the repair rights, or gave the club, Pikes Peak Group, permission to go up there and take care of it, maintain it. So ever since 1984, basically, we've been doing work on it. And it's not an easy place to get to. It's about 9 miles up on the trail from the trailhead. And it's a little over 3 miles from the top. And it's, I think, 2,600 feet elevation that you can run down if you want to, but then you got to turn around and go back up. So and like I say, the burning part, in 1990, I found out that the club went up there and somebody had built a fire right out in the middle of the floor. So they went in there and they replaced those burnt boards. And in 2008, the club went back up there and put another roof on it, painted it. 2 years later, sometimes you got to really work hard to get people motivated to go up there and hike the trash out. And they had a lot of shingles that they took off. So loading up those shingles in a backpack and carrying them 3 miles either up or 3 miles down, they ended up carrying them down to Mountain View. And the Cog Railroad came along and picked them up, which hopefully that's what we're going to be able to do next year with our stuff. But so we went up there this past summer. I've been talking to the Forest Service since 2016 to kind of get things going with that. And things come up each year, the weather, or we weren't ready, or then COVID came along. And so it wasn't until last summer that we started. And I just got to pull my hat off to the America's Mountain Group and the Forest Service, because they were excellent in helping us get all this done. We were able to go up and put our roofing material, our paint, everything that we needed in the new Visitor Center and down in the basement. And so that was our kind of headquarters. And they let us come in the gate early. So we were able to get our group of we had 37 different individuals that worked over this period of time. And so the Forest Service, Josh Von Lowe, you know Josh, he actually came up there and went down with us one day and helped. And so we had we had over 1,000 pounds of shingles that we had to carry down.
Ooh.
And we had 8 2x6, 14 feet long treated boards that we had to carry down. Those turned out to be the most difficult to carry down. It's kind of an awkward thing to carry a 14-foot board where you got to go all those little sharp turnarounds on the trail, wiggle down there. But got them all down there.
I'm picturing you try to do a switchback without banging that thing into something.
Really?
Down. Yeah.
Really. You got to lift it over those rocks and everything else. And but yeah, that wasn't easy, but we got them all down there. And to begin with, me and another fellow went down there. Mark Silas went down there and spent the night and measured and took pictures and kind of got the plans together. And we came back and we put a booklet together because I wasn't going to be down there most of the time with these people doing work. And we had a lot of different people, had a big turnover, different people on different days. So we put a booklet together, and that worked really good for them to look at the pictures and read what needed to be done and all that kind of stuff. But that was the first time I ever spent the night at the A-frame. Have you spent the night there?
I've not.
Oh, you need to go. I tell you what, if the Forest Service ever puts that property up for rent or lease or to buy or whatever, I'm on it. I'm on it real quick. Because you can't believe when the sun goes down, all the lights come up at downtown, and you can see nearly to Kansas.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite a view.
No doubt.
And look at all those lights during night. And then in the morning, about at sunrise, those lights are still going, and then here comes the sun coming up, and it's an excellent spot. We really enjoyed staying there, and we had, like I say, we had 8 different days that people worked, and Mark and I went down there and did 2. There were 4 days where there were people, a big group of people that spent the night there and worked, and we reshingled it. We put 3 coats of paint on it. Let's see, we had 5 gallons of paint that we ended up putting on that old dry, thirsty wood. And since that thing had been built in '64, there are these 2x6s that we carried down. They had never been replaced. They were pretty well just gone. They were rotted. So we replaced those, and we put new shingles on the roof, and we patched another hole that was burned on the floor. Through the years, I've seen a couple of different pieces of tin that are placed in the floor and up against the wall, and there's a sign overhead that says, don't burn wood fires in here. And you're supposed to use a little backpacking stove, And I'm sure there are a lot of people that get up there, with their intentions of summiting Pikes Peak, they don't have a stove with them. So they end up building a fire. Every time I go up there, on this metal, they have wood ashes, pieces of wood that didn't get burned, trash and everything else. And so evidently another fire had gotten under this metal piece, had burned a hole in the floor and burned a hole out through the wall. So, we're into that situation where sometimes you don't always have the best folks that are staying there. And hopefully it was a good thing that they actually put it out, because it burned a pretty good sized hole in the floor and through the wall. So there's a little spring there. So I think they got the water and put the thing out. But so if you end up going up there, and you need to go, I think you need to go up there and check it out and look. But if you do go, it's a pretty brown, Forest Service brown color now. And it's really neat. And the thing that really excited me about this whole job was all the enthusiasm that different people came in there and helped. We had a lot of people that were not in the club, but they wanted to come down there and they wanted to do their part to keep this little old building looking sharp,
Sure.
So,
and like you said, so Barr Camp is about halfway up Barr Trail.
Right.
And then the A-frame is about halfway between Barr Camp and the summit. Is that a good way to
True.
describe it?
True.
And
More or
right
less.
right about at tree line.
Yeah.
Like you said, around 11,500. Tree line is anywhere between that and 12,000,
Right.
depending on where you're at.
Right.
So it's, you're there and you're thinking, wow, I'm halfway up there. But that's where the tough part of Barr Trail really starts, because then it gets to be you're completely exposed, and it's pretty rocky after that.
It is. Yeah.
That's the brutal part. Although a lot of people would argue the first 3 miles of Barr Trail are pretty brutal too.
You do a lot of elevation gain in the first 3 miles. Yeah. On those switchbacks. Yeah. But no, when you get up to the top and, you're either go or you don't go. And like I say, with those storms that come up, you got to make a decision pretty quick, because you don't want to hunker down there on the side of that mountain, dodging lightning bolts and hail and whatever you're going to get into.
It's a very bad thing.
Yeah. But, here's another opportunity. I stated there are opportunities to work on Barr Trail, volunteer with these groups. And another opportunity is going to come around to help finish our project there on the A-frame. There's a huge rock. I don't know how much this rock might weigh, but it's right against the back of the A-frame. Now, the back of the A-frame roof comes down and it actually goes below grade. And there's a tree that evidently the roots are pushing this rock against the back of the A-frame. So we need to get back up there and either chip off part of the rock or try to remove the rock. And like I say, it's a pretty good sized piece of rock. So I don't know what we're going to do, but that's the plan. And then all the shingles that we took off, we're going to have to carry those out. And I know there'll still be a lot of trash. People go up there and they just don't take their trash out. And so we'll be doing that probably in June or July or so. So, and we'll be doing some advertising. I'm sure we'll be going on the Barr Camp website or maybe 14ers.com, which we advertised last time. So there'll be an ample opportunity for people to find out about that if they want to come up there and give us a hand. And one thing, my closing thought here, like I said, Pikes Peak Group has been in existence for over 100 years. And we've been having classes, we've been teaching people to get out into the mountains safely and things like that. And one afternoon, when our people were hiking up from their work on the A-frame, there was a lady that we found out her name was Christy, and she was from Alabama, and she was doing just exactly like what we've talked about. Started at the trailhead that morning and was going to go to the top of Pikes Peak. And the weather turned that afternoon, and we got a grapple storm. So if you don't have the right gear to keep dry, you get wet and you get cold. And Christy was wearing shorts and a t-shirt of some sort, probably even cotton, I don't know. And so she was in trouble. And our group, made me really proud to watch this, because we had a group of 5 people that came up with her. They gave her food, they gave her water, they gave her encouragement. And when she came up, she had 3 layers of coats on. She had some tights on. And, she was still, that last mile is a tough hike up Barr Trail.
Up the Golden Stairs.
That made me so proud of seeing them lead Christy up there. And we took her into the first aid group there. And I'm sure if they had not been coming along, that would have been a search and rescue. It probably would not have turned out really good, know. So that was a pleasing moment to me.
Yeah, it's when people email me, like I said, they see the column or they see the podcast, and they email me about doing, they want to come out and do a 14er, and I get that. And of course, Pikes Peak is very popular. It's America's mountain, as you mentioned, and right outside of Colorado Springs, so it's easy to get to. But I spend a lot of time, and I don't really want to be in the position of telling people not to do anything,
right.
But I'm very honest with them about really think about what you're doing when you go up there. It's 12 miles, 12 and a half miles one way. And when you get there, you have to have a way, unless you plan on coming down, and don't think coming down is easier than going up, because it's not.
Right.
How are you going to get off of there? That highway, is it open, or are you going to get up there before the visitor center is closed and somebody get you out of there? A lot of logistics to think about. And I don't want to tell people not to do anything, but I want them to really think about what you're doing when you take on this very arduous hike. There's a conception that since Pikes Peak is so popular, it must be the easiest one to do. And as you can, it's not the easiest one to do by a long stretch. There's so many easier 14ers to do, but they're more remote, and I get it. And you have to travel a ways to get to them, and you have to deal with crowds. Bierstadt has crowds and Quandary has crowds, but they're easier ones to do. But I always try to tell people, think about all these different factors, and then if you can plan around all these things, then sure, go for it. But that's why I usually tell people, get to Barr Camp, spend the night there. Of course, it's good to remind people you have to make a reservation if you want to spend the night there. You just can't pop in and decide you want to spend the night there. And then, kind of evaluate things. Spend the night, relax, get up the next morning, look at the weather. There's no shame in deciding that maybe this isn't the thing for you. And you don't get any bonus points if you end up being a search and rescue mission.
That's right.
That's never a good thing. So, but I'm glad you guys are out there. I'm a member of that group, although I haven't been up there, maintaining the A-frame, because that is the last safe place to stay before you're completely exposed for the final 3 miles to the summit. And that's a valuable thing. I'm so glad that, the Pikes Peak Group is maintaining that and making it safe. And when you mentioned that rock, I was going to say maybe the proper application of high explosives, but if it's up against the A-frame, that's probably not going to do anybody any good. That may not help anything.
Yeah. And, another thing that I'd like to pass on, while at the visitor center down in the basement, the people there showed me a little room that if people do get in trouble up there, and the visitor center is closed, on the south side of that building is the big overhead door entrance to the basement. There's a door that is always open, and you can go inside there, and it's just a room that you go inside, but they have a phone there, and you can use that phone to call out for emergency. And I thought that was very, very smart thinking on their part to have a place, because you're not going to be a Fred Barr. You're not going to be able to break into the visitor center there to spend the night. So that was good to know.
Great. Dean, it sounded like Fred Barr was, I'm trying to picture hiking up Pikes Peak without there being much of a trail.
Right.
And it's not, forest out in this part of the country, people who live out east, and I came from out east, the forests are very thick, a lot of underbrush and things like that. So hiking through the forest, real bushwhacking is difficult. Right. It's not so difficult here necessarily in Colorado, except, maybe where there's a lot of scrub oak. It's pretty open. I mean, a lot of times you can wend your way through the trees pretty easily, but still it always amazes me that people had the wayfinding skills back then when you're climbing up through a forest, and you know how it is, you can't see the peak all the time. You can see it from a distance and still come out where they're supposed to come out. It just always amazed me. We're so used to, we use Fred Barr's maps or Orms's maps and stuff that they spend the time to create. But when those guys were going up there, they didn't have maps. They just had their intuition, I guess, about which way to go, and somehow came out where they're supposed to come out. Just always amazed me. We're so much, we have GPS now and mapping and all these kind of things, of how we're benefiting from that very basic, somehow built into their brain wayfinding skills. That I think is lost on a lot of people, is having that skill. How do you find your way around if you don't have a map or your GPS stops working or anything?
Exactly.
Those guys had none of that stuff. It's amazing how that worked out. Yeah.
Well, I've worked on several trails, and it is interesting to see how the people put the little flags here and work their way on up the elevation and stuff like that. But it is a skill.
Yeah.
And like you say, back then they didn't have all these fancy gadgets that we have now. So they did quite a service. Yeah.
And even map making at the time, well, it was pretty good. It wasn't nearly as advanced as it was now. So who knew that squiggly line somebody drew was actually the way it was? It may have been off by a distance or something. So it's pretty amazing. When you guys are ready to do that project up there again, let me know and I'll make sure to feature it, mention it on the podcast and get it on my column and stuff. I'll be happy to get that there. And if anybody wants to, and I guess you don't have to be a CMC Pikes Peak Group member,
No.
but this would probably be a really great way to get introduced to the work that CMC does and the Pikes Peak Group does is to engage in this project. I think it's for people a whole lot younger than me, but it sounds like a lot of fun. And from what I heard from last year's project, when you all were up there, people who I heard who were up there had a good time. And I know it's work that even people have no idea how it happened, probably appreciate, who've gone through the A-frame and took some shelter there, probably appreciate, I'm sure they appreciate the work that everybody's done up there.
And you meet a lot of people that are probably liking to do the things that you like to do, so it's a good fit. And it always makes me feel good to kind of contribute to something like that. And I know, like I say, all these 37 folks that were up there helping us, they had a good time. They really did. They appreciate it.
It's a shame the train doesn't go a little closer to there, so you don't have to haul that stuff down there. But and when you mentioned Mountain View, I just want to let people know that's a train stop on the Cog Railway. That is the closest one to Barr Camp, and it's a resupply point. And it's about a mile.
No, it's surprising. It's surprising. It's I'd say about 2.5 miles.
Is it that far? Okay.
Yeah, and it's not a real elevation gaining hike. You hike not flat, but it's a good way if people want to buy a ticket to go to Mountain View. They can get off and have to arrange it with the COG, of course.
Right.
And there's also the possibility if people want to hike up Pikes Peak and ride down on the COG, there's a way that you can buy a ticket.
Right.
But you got to get up to the top and get your seat on that train. But there's different ways of getting up Pikes Peak and coming down Pikes Peak and all that kind of stuff.
And the trail you mentioned earlier that Rocky Mountain Field Institute's working on the other side of Pikes Peak, the Devil's Playground Trail, still we just had them on the podcast a few months ago, still a few years worth of work on there.
Yes.
And the existing trail is still open. So the current trail is still there. They're building an alternate trail, I guess, so you can still hike up that side. I personally think the backside of it is a nicer hike, mostly because it's less traveled, but you don't have any shelters. There's no A-frame. There's no Barr Camp on the other side or anything like that. But there's a lot of work being done. And I know there's been some discussion about creating other trails to go up to the summit. And, maybe those things will come into fruition sometime. But as you and I know, dealing with the Forest Service can be a long and involved process.
Yes.
And sometimes it takes a while for those things to happen. Dean, I really appreciate you taking the time. I wish I was able to see the presentation you did, but I was away. I hope that if you give the presentation again, you let me know and I'll help people find it so they can come out and see it. And I would love to see it, but thank you for summarizing it today on the podcast.
No, you bet. Thank you for inviting me. And I'll give another little invitation to March 20th. Our next presentation is going to be about Albert Ellingwood. And I know he's got several little mountain routes and mountains and things like that named after him. So he was a very early mountaineer and pioneer. And so March 20th, that's going to be our next presentation.
Okay.
And so people can go on cmc.org and check out the club, find out what's going on. We have lots of hikes. We have lots of classes that we do, and we have these programs that we're going to be doing every month.
Great.
Here in Colorado Springs.
Great.
So thank you again for letting me be on your podcast this morning.
Well, and Dean, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
You bet. It was fun.
All right, everybody, and thank you for listening to the Outdoors with Hiking Bob podcast.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.